Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be painting this winter tree that's lost all its leaves quite early, but there's still some late autumn colour in the landscape. It's a semi-abstract painting, so I hope you'll enjoy watching me sort of having a bit of a play and experimenting to try and create this painting. I'm using Milford 100% cotton watercolour paper. It's cold pressed. It's taped to my board with decorator's masking tape, and my board's at an angle of about 45 degrees. I've used a large Japanese goat hair calligraphy brush to wet the page, and I'm now using it to splash in or streak in a combination of raw sienna and burnt sienna to give me a real lovely glow in the sky. This is Prussian blue with a bit of indigo and some burnt umber in it, and I want some lovely deep rich colour in this sky. I'm now going to use my water mister and spray into the rich thick colour and then let the water drips run down, and then just before it covers up all of that beautiful burnt sienna and raw sienna, I'm going to turn my board, and by turning it I kind of can control the directional flow of the water, and I can keep tipping and tilting it. And so what I'm trying to do is to keep this really beautiful dramatic sky, which will lighten back quite a lot. Prussian blue goes on really dark, but it does lighten back. There's quite a big sort of drying shift. So I'm going to make sure I get a bit more of the burnt sienna into my sky in that sort of central area. Everything's still wet, so I can add, and I can sort of blend it through. I'm blending it through and adding it with an Escoda size 14 Ultimo synthetic mop brush. And then once I've blended the burnt sienna in a little bit more, I'm going to lay my board flat, and once I lay it flat, the paint won't move anymore down the page, and just before I dry it, I can carefully put in with my 3/4 inch flat brush a few small streaks of burnt sienna, and then run the flat brush through the wet paint again, just to build up that indication of those smaller streaks of cloud in the distance. So the painting is completely dry, and you can see how much lighter it's dried back. Still a nice depth of colour there though, and I think it's going to make an interesting backdrop. Now I'm going to put in a very simple foreground. I'm going to use my Pro Art Harkey brush and brush in some burnt sienna with a bit of raw sienna across the land, and then dipping into those darker colours, the Prussian blue and the burnt umber and the indigo, running through just a few marks just to give me a sort of something in nothing for my foreground, somewhere for my tree to begin to grow from. I can add to this foreground as I go, but for now I'm just sort of laying the foundations of colour, but still trying to keep some of the light across the horizon where there's patches of unpainted paper and dry brush. This is my Pro Art small sword liner brush, and using the mixture of Prussian blue, burnt umber, indigo and a bit of Paynes grey, I'm now going to paint in my tree. And before I put in the main trunk, I'm going to put in just quite a lot of very fine branches, and these will act as sort of like a backdrop, so that when I put my tree in, my main tree, I'll have these sort of fainter, smaller branches behind it, so that'll give it some sort of a sense of mass and presence on the page, if you see what I mean. As I go, I can just sort of scribble paint around the base of the tree, and this will help to bed it in. I'm going to be putting in quite a lot of sort of rough detail, both painted and etched with the card, around the base of the tree. And what I'm looking for is this sort of semi-abstract, impressionistic suggestion of all the the brambles and the weeds sort of overgrowing around this tree. So continuing to use this dark mixture, I can start to get my thicker tree trunk in. I'm going to start off not too thick and gradually build it up as I go along, just building up the structure of the tree. I did that with my Polina Bright size 1 synthetic round brush, but any sort of similar sized round brush, mop or calligraphy brush will do the same thing. And now I've changed back to my sword liner to put in the finer branches, building up around the base as I go. I'm trying to keep the brushwork as spontaneous and as kind of loose as possible, but still to keep that kind of basic tree shape going. Now this is a chopped up piece of plastic store card. And I'm etching through the wet paint. You'll see quite a lot of this in this painting because I want to build up layers. And so when you etch through rich paint, you etch back to almost back to the white of the paper or the stained paper if you're using staining colours like I am with the Prussian blue. And you get sort of paler marks over the darker ones. And so it builds up like you've got layers. You can have the effect of branches pulled out across other ones by etching through the paint. And then going back and building up more layers, more branches. And this is the process that I'll use to paint the tree, alternating between adding branches and undergrowth, and then going in and pulling across and scraping through that paint with the corner of my card to create more branches, because as well as etching through the paint, it will drag paint with it and give you some marks kind of printed on the paper as well. So it's a really useful tool. So by building up slowly and scraping away paint like this, I can build up quite a lot of sort of layers and a layered approach, if you see what I mean, rather than trying to get the shape of the tree in first go. And you can do that, but I'm looking this time to experiment with a different method. So here I'm putting in some much stronger darks with quite a lot of Paynes grey for some stronger shadowy areas of the branches and to thicken up the tree trunk. But then once I've done that, I will be pulling a lot of that paint out very quickly with the card, scraping across the trunk, but also pulling out the paint over the sky area. So it looks like those tiny little masses of long sticks that grow out from the base or all the way up the trunks in some cases. And then balancing the ground out with an extra sort of large sort of twiggy structure coming out across the right side of the tape and a few more branches coming off of this tree. And now this is the corner of my card again, where I can really go to town on this lovely rich paint in the trunk. Now that I've got all my branches building up, I can put these sort of final touches in across the branches to get them to really overlap and layer and to really sort of begin to look quite sort of wild. Now for the finishing touches across the foreground, some nice bright burnt sienna. I don't want to overdo the foreground too much. This is a sort of clear case of what I like to call something and nothing. Just a bit of this and that, just to really loosely indicate all that sort of like, you know, dead grasses and brambles and things like that, the late autumn hedgerow sort of shrubbery. Just balancing up the last few branches, and I mean I want it to look natural and unkempt and wild, but I don't want it to look sort of too cluttered, if you know what I mean. And now I just need to balance out the left side of the foreground and put in some more plants, some more sort of suggestions of grasses and things like that. And then scratch and scrape through that detail with my card to layer up even more. Trying to stay as loose as possible. And then just get a few more darks into the foreground and then go back in with the card so that the whole painting's fairly harmonious. It's got similar mark making techniques across the whole thing, so that keeps the painting in harmony, as well as the sort of colour harmony throughout. I've used the same colours for the tree and all the undergrowth that are in the sky, and that creates a nice sort of balance of colour. So I think I've finished now, and I always take a moment to stand back and have a good look. And then I like to remove the, remove the masking tape. And once that's removed, it just gives me this clean white border, and having that almost makes it look finished, like it was in a frame or a mount or a mat or something. So I can see whether or not it still looks balanced once that tape comes off. And here it is. I've put it against a plain background, and you can hopefully see that it does look quite finished. I like the semi-abstract nature of it. I think it's quite expressive. I think there's lots of movement in it. I'm pleased with the amount of unpainted paper and dry brush, and if you look closely you can see the tangled interwoven branches all around the trunk where I've etched the paint as well as painting with the paint, if you see what I mean. So I'm very pleased with this technique, and I'll be using it again. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching that as much as I enjoyed painting it. I must admit that was lots of fun. So thanks again for watching, and thanks for your support, all those of you who are subscribed. And if you're not subscribed, I hope you consider subscribing, because it doesn't cost anything, but it really helps with my reach on YouTube. So thanks so much to my lovely Patreon group who support this channel, and I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.